A major question as the war is starting to ratchet up is, what is the United States going to do? Was Wilson elected due to what he promised in international relations? No. After all, he's elected 2 years before the start of World War II. So, nobody really saw this coming. But nevertheless, Wilson is going to try and embark on one of the greatest American traditions up to this point, and that is American neutrality in foreign affairs. We as the United States, basically stayed out of everything when it came to Europe. We did not fight Napoleon. We did not, we did not, or we did not fight Napoleon, nor did we fight with him. Right? We stayed out of European affairs. World War I we're going to try and be that neutral nation that we've always been, but it's going to be pretty much the formal end of American neutrality in American affairs. So let's talk about it for a second. First thing you have to understand is that there are two sides to World War I. You have the Allies and the Central Powers. The Allies include Britain, France, and Russia. The Central Powers are called Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Now, don't talk about the Axis powers, because Axis powers, those are World War II nations, not World War I. For the purposes of the United States, this is a confrontation between the two greatest powers, Germany and Great Britain. And this is how we're going to be discussing the conflict. Our policy is the same during this time period since it was in 1790. It's going to be neutrality. Wilson declares neutrality, and in typical Wilsonian style, i.e. idealistic style, he's going to ask the American people not only to be neutral in action, but also be neutral in thought. Now, do you suppose that the American people were neutral in relations to this war in terms of their thoughts? As you can suspect, Americans are going to align themselves with the Allies, since we had more contacts with the British. There were, of course, some who supported the Germans due to the fact that we have a large Germanic population in the United States. Yet, even those who were partial in their thinking, they did agree on being neutral. They just did not want the United States to be a part of the war. Now, neutrality is an easy thing to say, not an easy thing to do. So you need to understand a few things about neutrality, or else you're not going to be able to understand the rest of this material. Neutrality is not a policy of avoiding war. It's a policy instead of war that's supposed to work in your benefit. Neutrality is supposed to basically be operated by rules, a set of rules set down by international law. And the international lawgiver comes from the practice and agreement that nations have developed over time. There were rules, and you were supposed to follow them, although there's no official lawgiver and no official law enforcer. It's tricky business. So when you say you're a neutral, you need to figure out what exactly that means. What are the rules and duties you're supposed to do? For example, the most obvious thing you're not supposed to do is allow your citizens to join in the British or the German army. We can't allow either side to operate of our ports. But do you think a neutral country can allow its citizens to make loans on either sides? Should that country stop its citizens from doing such a thing? The rules allowed bankers from neutral countries to make loans to other countries at war. If this was allowed, which country or set of countries do you think we're going to loan the most money to? The Allies, because we have more contact with them. So keep this in mind. What about selling war materials? Can we sell weapons, explosives, etc. to others? Can a neutral country sell these items to countries at war? The answer is yes, although they are subject to seizure by the other side. Now let's think about it. Between the United States and Europe, there's this really big thing called the Atlantic Ocean, right? And the last thing I checked, the British Navy was the strongest one in the entire world. So if we sell war materials to both sides, and they're subject to seizure by both, the British are going to get more materials at the end of the day. And that's exactly what happens. The question that we have to ask is this. If we're selling war materials to both sides, of which the British are getting the lion's share, and if we're loaning money to both sides, and again, the British are receiving a lion's share, are we being neutral? The answer is actually yes, because we are playing by the rules. Now, we can extend the rules and not sell to anybody, and there was a lot of money at stake. And more importantly, we would be changing the rules after the fact. The Allied and Central Powers knew the rules, and they drew up their sides with these rules in play. So they were aware of them and how they would play out. If we changed the rules and didn't sign to either, we would be denying Britain an advantage they knew they had at the beginning of the war. If we announced our impartial neutrality, or I should say our complete neutrality, they would have been dancing in the streets of Berlin. So you see the problem. Remember, neutrality does not mean to avoid war at all costs. It's a policy instead of war that's supposed to work to benefit your nation. Now, there are going to be violations of American neutral rights. And in fact, it's going to be the British that are going to do it first. Neutrals are supposed, for example, are supposed to have the right to trade in non-military goods with any port that's not blockaded. Now, what is a non-military good in the 20th century? The list is very small. You would be surprised. In the 20th century war, you're making war not just on the military, but on the people of a nation. Therefore, food can be considered a military good. The point is, there's not that many things that would be considered a non-military good. Now, what's a blockade? Ships outside a port that stops traffic from coming in and out. Well, yeah, but we are supposed to be able to, during this time, we're going to be using things like mines and submarines, new technology that changes what constitutes a blockade. In this mix, we're going to find that the United States' neutral rights are violated by both the British and the Germans. The British, as I said, are the first to violate our neutral rights when they announced a blockade of Germany. Now, if you look at a map, you are going to see that there's only two ways of reaching Germany, in the North Sea or in the English Channel. The British laid down mines in both the North Sea and the English Channel, and then told American shippers that you better stop in England to get a map of the minefields. And when German shippers came on board and said that came to Britain and said that their cargo was going to Germany, it was seized. That's a violation of neutral rights. Now, what was the United States going to do about it? How are we going to respond? One possibility, of course, is threaten to go to war. It's an option. Well, Wilson protested the seizures and said that we would collect damages at a later date. And then we basically let them do what they were doing. Now, what is that going to do with trade between the United States and Germany? It's going to effectively cut it off, right? Meanwhile, trade with the United States and Great Britain is going to soar. So we have a decision here to make, and that really favors the British. Wilson is not making a conscious decision to help the British. He's only playing by the rules of being a neutral power.